Good afternoon, everybody. It's Alan Cowie from the new Anglia Growth Hub. Sitting opposite me in our super high-tech studio is my guest, and it is Charlotte Bate from Mad HR. Good afternoon, Charlotte.
Hi there, Alan.
Welcome to the Growth Hub. Thanks very much for coming in today. We're going to be talking about how to employ people.
So what we're going to be covering today are what most people want to know. What do they have to do? What do they need to know about the legal requirements of employing someone? And it's really also about looking at what is it that you want and who do you need to recruit? How are you actually going to get them into your business? And what do you need to do once you have them in your business? Ultimately, it's about getting return on your investment and really getting your people to hit the ground running as quickly as possible. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of introduce myself and Mad HR. At Mad HR, we deliver quality outsourced HR support through our products and services, and these include ad hoc HR support, strategic HR consultancy. We deliver training and coaching, and for those organisations who want to retain the HR function in-house, we have an online toolkit which provides all the documentation that a business would need in order to manage that kind of people aspect of that business. So that's just a bit about kind of what we do there at Mad HR. But in terms of what we're here to talk about today, it's interesting, 80% of our people are looking at that first step to employing people. And whether you're adding the first employee or the 20th employee to your business, it is a big cost. It's a big commitment and responsibility, and it's vital that you really plan for this and you get it right from the start. So what I wanted to talk about is doing it the right way, ensuring that you get the right person into the right position for your business so that they can hit the ground running as quickly as possible. There's an element of risk in most things that we do in business. However, what we want to do is try and avoid making costly mistakes, whether it be through breaching the Equality Act and discriminating against an employee, or it might be avoiding employing the wrong person for the role, resulting in them leaving your business, or in fact you needing to exit them for whatever reason. So really, employing people with employing the right people is key to a business's success. So businesses with employees are 3 more likely to survive. It's people that are going to grow and develop your business, and it's people that are going to ensure that your business achieves the objectives. So it's just some kind of basic requirements for those people that are considering employing the first person to join their team. Employers' liability insurance, this is something which is a legal requirement, and we recommend that you get at least kind of £5 million worth of cover, and it protects you against the cost of compensation claims arising from an employee illness or injury sustained as a result of them working for you. As I say, it is a legal requirement of your business if you employ 1 or more people, and each day without cover could potentially bring fines of up to £2,500. Also, you will need to register with a HMRC as an employer, and for most organisations you can actually do this online, which is helpful. You must register before the first payday, but you just need to be aware that you can't register more than 2 months before you actually start paying people. So it's just one thing that you really need to consider. From a health and safety aspect, a documented health and safety policy is actually a legal requirement if you employ 5 or more people. However, it is worthwhile you having a documented policy, as this really demonstrates your commitment to managing health and safety effectively. Health and safety is incredibly important because you have a duty of care to protect your employees and make sure that they have a safe working environment. But equally, if you leave yourself exposed in this area, then it can be incredibly costly. So businesses do need to look at this really quite carefully. In terms of risk assessments, these do need to be done, and they identify what needs to be done to control the health and safety in your working environment. And you can get information, free information about this sort of thing from the hse.gov.uk website. But you know, it's really just in terms of health and safety, thinking about, so if you're employing people, what sort of working environment are they going to be working in? What are they going to be doing? Are they going to need personal protective equipment or PPE? Are they going to be coming in contact with certain chemicals? Are they going to be using certain types of machinery or equipment that they'll need training on? Are they going to be working at height, for example, or carrying heavy loads? So will they need working at height training or manual handling training? I would just say it's important to think about all of these in the planning and the preparation stage rather than waiting for you to get somebody on day one, because usually once you've gone through that process of recruitment and you've actually onboarded someone, you're kind of so desperate to have them hit the ground running that all of this can kind of go by the wayside once you actually get someone through the door. So moving on to the kind of preparation stage of recruitment, it's really about asking, do you actually need to recruit? What is the reason for it? Now there's a couple of reasons why it's usually the case. Usually it's either to bring in more money, so whether that be through sales or product development or service delivery. The other reason might be that it's to release you and your time so that you can go out and make more money. But what's really, really important is that you are clear on the skills that you need within your business and what you're going to need that individual to do. So moving on to what that actually looks like. So if you're thinking about what you want the person to do, a job description is a really good tool to use to hone in on what is required. A job description, it's not a list of tasks of what the individual is going to do on a daily basis, because that can take sheets and sheets and sheets of A4 and it will be endless and you'll constantly be updating it. What a great job description does is it focuses on the main purpose of that individual's job role. So what are their main accountabilities and responsibilities that, you know, that their role focuses on? Job descriptions are useful at the recruitment stage because within most industries you have generic job titles that are recognised, but invariably businesses are individual, and that job role within your organisation, that's where the job description can really hone in and explain to the individual what it means to be doing that job in your business. Equally, once you have got that person on board, the job description can help keep them on track in terms of performance management at a later date as well. Equally, it's also about thinking about the sort of person that you want, the sort of characteristics that they have. So what knowledge do they need to have? Do they need to have certain exposure or experience of a certain industry or a certain scenario? What skills do they need? What sort of attitude do they need to have? This is where you would draft a person specification, and this just helps again keep you on track of when you are recruiting and you're meeting people, you know exactly what it is that you're looking for and you can stick to the plan and find out what your business needs so that you don't kind of lose your way and end up wasting time. With the person specification, you might think about adding certain qualifications that you need for the individual, but just make sure that you put or equivalent. So for example, if you require GCSEs, for example, it will be GCSEs or equivalent, because we don't want to be seen as discriminating on the grounds of age, because depending on somebody's age, they might not have had the opportunity to have a GCSE. It might be an O-level or a GCSE, for example, a GCE. So that we'll talk a bit more about potential discrimination pitfalls later on. So Also, when you're thinking about employing someone into your business, it's worth considering the sorts of contract that you're going to put that individual on. So there's loads of different types of contract. You've got a permanent contract, you've got a fixed term contract. If you want somebody to be employed for a certain period of time to do a certain project, for example, you might have a full-time person requirement or a part-time, or you might want to put someone on a 0 hours contract. And by 0 hours, what I mean is that there's no contracted hours, so you're not obliged to provide that individual with work, but equally on the flip side of that, they're not obliged to carry out the work for you when you need it. We'll talk a bit more about contracts later. The next thing is really important in terms of what salary and benefits are you going to offer. Now, if you're looking at employing your first person, then it's usually the cost associated with hiring that person that's a real kind of obstacle for you to overcome. So in terms of salary, I think that a great thing that you can do is just do your research, have a look at what the market rate for that position is, have a look at what other organisations within your industry are offering, and if you're not able to offer the kind of best salary, for example, can you do anything on the benefits package? Now, in terms of holiday entitlement, for example, there's the statutory minimums, which is the 20 days plus the 8 days bank holidays. But are you going to do anything in excess of those? If you are just doing the statutory minimums, then and that's all you can afford at that time, then how are you going to attract that top talent into your organisation? So that's really about when you work on your employer brand. So what's it like working for you? Why should those top talented people come and work for you? What's going to be their experience as being an employee of you and your brand? So, you know, it's about making sure that you get the message out there of what that is like, about you know, are there any promotional and development opportunities? What do you do in terms of training and development and exposure and levels of responsibility? Are you at the cutting edge of your industry and doing something new and innovative? Because it isn't often about the salary that you can offer. Sometimes it's about the people that they work with and the sort of business that they're working with. And, you know, also think about the hours of work as well, because flexible working is so much more popular nowadays. Really, it's about preparation. You need to be making sure that you are getting your processes right.
Just a quick question, Charlotte. This is just on characteristics, and Emily has put a question in on the chat box saying, can we be specific regarding gender and physical ability? She's saying that this person needs to be strong, for example.
Okay, that's a really interesting question. And a good question to ask. Thank you, Emily. I think what it's about, particularly in the job description, the person specification, and also the recruitment advertising that you're doing, what I would do in that circumstance is it's about stipulating what the role actually involves. So if it involves things like being very active, like lifting heavy loads, like working you know, in small spaces, or climbing up ladders and things like that, then make it very clear, because what happens is that people will then automatically self-select because they will see that what the job involves. So rather than you know, saying I need a person of a specific gender, so take, you know, for example, firemen and women, there's been quite a lot in the press about, you know, can women lift the same load as men, and the same with the army and women going onto the front line. Well, the reality is that yes, they can do, so don't deselect people yourselves. Focus on what the job actually involves in terms of the job role, and then I think that you will be a lot safer.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Emily. All right, we move on.
Okay, so just kind of talking more about the recruitment process really, there's so many different kind of methods of recruitment. You can use recruitment agencies, job boards, social media, job centres. So it really is about looking at what works for you and also looking at your budget, because obviously there is a cost attached to a number of those options. But also, you know, do you have your own website? Because you can use that as part of your recruitment process. Manage it appropriately, advertise the roles, make it attractive, make it reflect that employer brand. And just kind of ensure that it really projects the image that you want, because, you know, if you're getting candidates into your business, then that is the first thing that they will do. They will go and have a look at your website just to see what you're about, so make sure that that is inviting. What I will say about recruitment is that what you don't want is a very kind of protracted, prolonged recruitment process. You need to keep momentum, you need to respond quickly to candidates, because otherwise, you know, you do run the risk of losing good candidates. When it comes to the advertising, just think about the words that you're using. So I suppose this kind of goes back to the question that Emily's just posed. What we don't want to do is we don't want to discriminate against any of those kind of protected characteristics, so age, disability, gender, sexual orientation, all of those things. So what you want to do is, or don't want to do, is you don't want to ask for specific lengths of service. So, you know, 5 years of experience within the accounts arena, or 10 years of experience, because what you could have is you could have an individual, a younger candidate who ticks all of the boxes in terms of what you're looking for the job description and the person specification, but just by virtue of the fact of how old they are, they don't qualify, and that would be considered as age discrimination. Also, in terms of the wording, if you're saying that you want a young, lively, energetic person, then again that could be deemed as discriminating on the grounds of age. So do just think about the words and the connotations, because what you also don't want to do is you don't want to shrink your candidate pool. You want as many people to apply with the right skill sets, because it's ultimately about, can they do the job, not what they look like, or that sort of thing. Looking at the selection process, what are you going to do? Are you going to use an application form? Are you going to ask for CVs and a covering letter? If you are using an application form, just check it over, make sure that you're not asking for a date of birth. Again, you don't want to be considered as discriminating against someone's age. Also, with the application form, think about your audience. So is it available in different formats? For those people with a disability, with sight, visual problems, do you have it in a larger font or a larger text? Also, are you going to be using telephone interviews, for example? You might have a role where you get lots and lots and lots of applicants that are applying for the role, and you want to filter those down to know who you're going to get in for an interview. So a telephone interview is a great way of doing this. Again, think about that in terms of disability, discrimination, and making reasonable adjustments for these individuals. You might have somebody with a hearing impairment, so, you know, what's the alternative for them in that instance? When you're interviewing candidates, really think about how you can get candidates to demonstrate the skills that they're professing to have. So could you get them to do a presentation for you to really look at their their communication skills and their organisation skills and their interpersonal skills, could you get them to do an in-tray exercise if it's an administrative role, or do some tests on the computer? I was with a client the other day and they had an administration role. They did some tests and they were very surprised by how many of the candidates professed on their CV to have basic computer skills, but they really struggled to attach a document to an email. So just make sure that you are kind of putting checking mechanisms in place to really test if these candidates are able to do what they say they can. Is there anyone else that needs to be part of the interview process? So do you need somebody else to sense check and think about the questions that you are going to ask? So again, think about opening up to candidates, being quite structured but quite informal in the questions. Open questions are great, but avoid those questions which could be deemed as discriminatory. So avoid the how old are you, how are you going to manage your childcare, are you planning on having children. One question that I am aware that has been asked is a manager asked a candidate, before you get into bed at night, what do you do with your clothes? Now, the intent behind the question, yes, I know, this did really happen. The intent behind the question was to find out how organised and how methodical the individual was. However, the young lady's father didn't take too kindly to that question being asked, as you can imagine, of his teenage daughter. So really it's about thinking, what answer is it that you're wanting, and what is the best question to ask in order to elicit that response. When you're setting dates, if you've arranged a date for a meeting or an interview, then please just don't keep moving it. It takes a lot of time and planning on a potential candidate's part to attend interviews. So again, if you're going to agree a date, then stick with it. And you are at risk, if you don't, of potentially losing good candidates. In terms of your pool of applicants, what you need to do is ensure that you get their proof of right to work in the UK. You can get an up-to-date list of these documents from the gov.uk website. So for example, it might be a British passport would be a standalone document, or failing that, proof of national insurance documentation such as P45 or P60, along with a full birth certificate, and that is a full one, not one of the shortened ones as well. As I say, there is a list, an up-to-date list that you can get. There's a list A and a list B. The list B has a number of documents which work in combination with. There is up to a £5,000 fine if you're found to be employing people illegally. And also, when you're taking copies of these documents, make sure that you sign and date to verify that the original has been seen, and take a copy of all of the relevant pages. So if they've got work permits on them, that you're taking a copy of those as well. When it comes to selecting your candidates, make sure that you're making notes. Candidates can ask to see copies of those notes, and retain applications and the notes and applications of people that have been unsuccessful for a minimum of 6 months. And the reason for this is that you don't have to be employed to make a claim for discrimination, and if a claim is made, then the onus is on the employer to prove that no discrimination's taken place. And so how are you going to do that? Well, that's about having your notes. These are the questions that were asked, these are the responses that were given, and in relation to the successful candidate, this person was unsuccessful because they scored, this. Also, just please regret appropriately. So if someone has been unsuccessful, then make them aware of that and send them a nice letter. It's about protecting your employer brand. So they might not be right for right now, but you might want to keep them in a pool for use at a later date, or they could potentially be a customer or a client of the future, and they can either choose to positively advocate on your behalf or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, that's the worst, isn't it? When you apply for a role and it just disappears to a black hole and you never hear anything ever again.
Absolutely, absolutely, and really, you know, as you're going through this process, it's about drawing on your own experiences, and I'm sure that many of us have got positive experiences and negative experiences. So let's focus on the positives, and creating that kind of great employer brand, so that we get those key people into our businesses. So what happens when it goes wrong? I don't want to labour on this too much, but you know, we've spoken quite a bit about potential discrimination claims. The awards for those are uncapped, so they can be very, very costly. But also it's about, you know, if you select the wrong person and you don't do your homework, they haven't got the right skills, then you might have to exit them from the business, which will disrupt the current team. It takes you back to square one, and it basically just wastes your time and resources. Equally, it might be that you're a great salesperson and you've sold the dream, but the reality is that you just don't live up to their expectations and they end up leaving you, which is again not a situation that you want to be in, because you don't want to be wasting time and resources. Or equally, it might be that you select someone to represent you and your brand, and those months and years that it's taken you to build your reputation, it can be damaged overnight just by that, that person's behaviours and actions. So really think about that carefully. Just one other point. You know, it might be that an individual's got an ulterior motive. They could be working with you for market research purposes, and I have known that happen in the past. So if you've not protected your business in terms of your contract of employment in your handbook, then they could leave your business with all of your kind of sensitive information, and that's not a position that you want to put yourself in. So once you've offered and the individual's verbally accepted, that is a legal agreement that you've entered into, whether it's in writing or not. So the rules of the kind of notice period would still be involved, in particular if you're looking to withdraw that. What all employers need to do is ensure that they have a written statement of particulars given to the individual within 8 weeks of starting. And that's quite commonly known as the contract of employment, and that needs to cover a number of areas in particular. So you know, make sure that you have all of that information to hand, and be very, very clear about what that's going to involve. So with the contract of employment and the employer handbook, it's about really outlining the expectations of both sides. So what's your expectation of the individual? What are they going to be doing for you, and how are they going to behave and act? But equally, what are you going to do in return? How can they expect to be treated? The contract of employment, it's about protecting your business. So, you know, they don't have to be complex documents that are full of jargon. It is important that they're commercially written to protect your business. And I've come across a number of employers that just tend to give out an offer letter, giving brief details, but preferring not to give a full contract until the end of the probationary period or for a couple of months after. Again, I would go back to what's the purpose of this? We need to be protecting the business. So when you employ somebody, it's likely that they're going to have access to all of your sensitive information, so your commercial data, your customer details, pricing details, marketing strategies, and these are all the things that need to be protected. So make sure that you cover that off in your contract of employment, and that you're giving that to the individual. Again, it's about this employer brand. These are what employees consider as normal. People want to see a strong contract. They want to see you know, a robust handbook. That is kind of the minimum expectation now. When it comes to your handbook, just make sure that your policies actually reflect your practices, and that everybody has access to it. So there's no point in having a handbook that only a manager holds, and the employee has to go and ask them for it. if you're managing someone else, make sure that you're familiarising yourself with those policies and procedures, because if a scenario happens, then you can bet that the individual will have read it from cover to cover and know exactly what the process is. So put yourself in a position of competence and confidence, and make sure that you know what it is that you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to be behaving. Worst case scenario, and you find yourself in a tribunal, the chair's likely to ask, does the company have a policy relating to the incident in question? And we would hope that the answer is going to be yes. The next question is, did the employer follow their policy? And if the answer is no, then you'll need to have a really solid business justification for why you didn't follow your own policy. So get involved with it, know what's being put into your handbooks, and just ensure that it is reflective of your practices. Just moving on to kind of the first day, really, it's about planning and preparing, and you will have put a lot of effort into the recruitment side of things. So when you do invariably get somebody into the business, really put some time aside to think about that induction and what that looks like and involves. And with the induction, it doesn't happen on the first day. That's not what it's going to involve. An induction lasts for a period of weeks and months. On the first day, do get the administration sorted. So if there's any documentation, any paperwork that you need from the individual, get it on that first day, because as I said earlier, once that individual's started and they're up and running, what you don't want to do is then have to spend all of your time chasing up the administrative side of things. What does the individual need to know to be effective in their role? Because again, you know, it's about getting them up and running as quickly as possible. Who do they need to be introduced to? So are there other members of the organisation? Are there certain suppliers, certain clients, customers that they need to be introduced to? And also, you know, think about the development plan for the individual. So have you identified any gaps in that recruitment process versus what you were looking for? So how are you going to bridge that gap? It's about creating that structured plan for the induction and signing it off when it's done, because this will happen over a period of time. So it's making sure that the individual can really take responsibility for that and make sure that they're getting all of that information, all of the tools and the skills that they need to do their job effectively, and that you're obviously managing them throughout that induction and also that very, very important probationary review process. So just kind of to summarise what we've been through, planning is so important. Plan who you want and what you want them to do. Get drafting that job description and that person specification so that you can keep in track of who you're looking for and what you want. Make sure that you have a very robust recruitment process, that you've got a robust and commercial contract and handbook that protects your business and the individual, and make sure that they, you know, have their employment rights protected as well. Use that induction. You know, I've turned up in businesses before, first day, haven't got a laptop or a computer, no desk, no telephone, nobody knows that you're turning up. That's not helpful. It's about protecting your employer brand. You've worked so hard to build it and it can be damaged really easily. When you employ that first person, make sure that they fit with you and your brand, that they understand it, that they're going to be an advocate of it, and that your actions reflect that brand. So don't sell the dream and then not live up to it. Take them on that journey as well. Okay. That's me done.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was really interesting, and certainly learned an awful lot of new things. And I hope that's given you some ideas to go away with as well and to think about. So let's get some questions in. If you have a question, then just raise your hand. We'll come to you. Belinda Johnston is first in. Belinda, can you hear us? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, you're a bit quiet, Belinda. Can you hear it? Okay, Charlotte.
I can hear you. I just didn't have my microphone down. Is that better?
Oh, that's better. Yes, thanks.
Yeah. If you are taking on an employer and you have a salary, what are the on costs that you need to consider? people talk about on costs, and I don't seem to be able to get a figure of what that should be.
Okay. It's really about your employer's national insurance and those contributions that you need to be making. And I think that the best port of call for you is really speaking to your accountant or your payroll person, and they can actually run a model for you as to what that looks like. So depending on the salary that you are wanting to pay that individual, then they will be able to run those cost formulas for you, but it's also about the size of organisation. So you know, you also need to think about auto enrolment and the pension and what that side of things is going to cost you, and they should be able to support you with those costs as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Belinda. We've got, am I saying the right, is it Zine? Zine, you on the line? Zian, sorry. Go for it.
Hi. I don't really know how to put the question, but sort of, what would sort of the differences be looking at employing an apprentice?
Okay. I think it's about looking at what you're going to pay the individual. So you've got the national minimum wage rates, and there's an apprentice rate on there, and you can get all of those up-to-date rates from the government website. But it's also looking about how old the individual is. So from a health and safety point of view, if you're employing a young worker, there are certain provisions such as how long they can work with you and what sort of environments they can work in as well. So it's really looking about that, and also considering that when you are employing an apprentice, working with the organisation that the apprentice comes from, and making sure that you've got written into your contract that they are an employee of the business, that they are bound by the terms and conditions and the policies of that business in terms of their behaviour. But you also need to be aware of the provisions of if, for example, you wanted to dismiss them, then you could potentially have to pay for the full kind of apprenticeship qualification, so what they would have got if they had been able to stay for the full term of the apprenticeship as well. So that's just another thing to consider.
Thank you, Zian. Emily, you've got another question. Are you there? Emily, hello.
Oh yes, hello.
Oh, yes.
Sorry. Hello. So my question is regarding seasonal staff. So if we were thinking of hiring or recruiting staff during the summer period, for example, purely for a month, and then different months depending on each season, how does that change everything? Is there some exemptions of paperwork with the HMRC, or does it stay the same?
It very much depends on the sort of contract that you want to put them on. So if, for example, you wanted them for a fixed period of time, they would still need a full employment contract, as would a normal kind of permanent employee with full-time working hours, for example. They would be entitled to the same terms and conditions, the same benefits as that individual, but the difference would be that you would have a fixed term provision clause in there saying that the contract is for a certain period of time, and that you're going to serve them with the contractual notice when that period ends. What you might also want to consider is a number of organisations in this situation, because they have the same people coming in year on year out, and at certain times of the year, then they tend to use a 0 hours contract. Again, they would need the same kind of full employment contract as your normal kind of workers, your permanent people. But it means that the hours aren't guaranteed, so that you can call them up and you can get them in when you need them, but when you have no work, then there's no obligation on you to find them work. But then that obviously just means that they're there as an employee, and you're not having to issue them with new contracts every time that you start. And then also that's about you building your team so that you've got that pool of people to call on when you want to.
Does that help, Emily?
Yes, it does. But we would, if we weren't thinking of recruiting anyone on a full-term full-time basis, how does that impact the contract? So we still do the same contract, or just as if we were going to have them full-time, just on the using the fixed-term contract?
With fixed-term contracts, it's about the difference there is that the contract will last. It's the duration of the contract which is really the difference there, and then you can word the hours of work accordingly. So it might be that that you have them on a part-time basis because you know that you've got X amount of work. With the 0 hours contract, their contract would remain and roll over even when they're not working for you, but the difference is that you don't have to supply them with a certain number of hours each week. It can fluctuate, so one week they might have work full-time hours, the next week they might only work 15 hours, and the next week they might not work any, and it's about the wording around the hours which is important for that aspect.
If it's okay with you, we'll link you guys up perhaps after this.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? If you've got them, now's your last chance. Just raise your hand and we can come to you. But I think that's all of them for now. Thanks to Charlotte for today's presentation, and it's goodbye from me, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.